The lights of Nashville twinkled in the distance as Elisa Mason drove home to Memphis, Tennessee. Her fingers drummed the steering wheel to the beat of the country music playing on the radio, her voice softly accompanying each verse. At 34, Elisa still carried the dream of a youth that never had the chance to blossom, a talent stored in drawers of frustration, in notebooks of lyrics never set to music, in home recordings that only her shower and her car knew about. The digital clock read 11:47 p.m. when she pulled up to her two-story house in suburban Memphis. The living room lights were on, which meant that Richard, her husband of 12 years, was still awake. Elisa took a deep breath, grabbed her purse and the folder of sheet music she had worked on during the songwriting workshop in Nashville, a 4-hour drive to attend a 3-hour event without Richard knowing. As far as he was concerned, she was working overtime at the accounting office. "Where the hell have you been?" Richard's voice cut through the silence as Elisa closed the door behind her. He was sitting in the leather chair, a glass of whiskey in his right hand, his cell phone in his left. "It's almost midnight. Working. End of month closing, you know how it is." Elisa tried to keep her voice steady, but her eyes avoided his. "Bullshit." Richard stood, setting his glass down on the coffee table with enough force to make the amber liquid splash. "I called the office at 9. They said you left at 6 as usual." Elisa's stomach sank. The folder of sheet music felt like it weighed a ton in her hand. I went to get some coffee afterward to think a bit. I needed some time." Richard stepped closer, his face a mask of suspicion and suppressed anger. "A 4-hour window? Do you think I'm an idiot?" His eyes fell on the folder. "What is this?" Before Elisa could react, he snatched the folder from her hands. Sheets of lined paper fell to the floor as Richard scanned its contents, his face changing from suspicion to disdain. "Nashville Songwriters Workshop," he read from the promotional brochure, laughing humorlessly. "So this is what you're doing behind my back? Wasting our money on this music nonsense again?" "It's not nonsense, Richard. It's important to me. Important?" Richard threw the papers on the floor. "What's important is paying the bills. What's important is having a real job, not chasing fantasies like a teenager. How many times do I have to tell you this, Elisa? You'll never amount to anything. Give up being a singer. You're terrible at it." The words hit Elisa like physical blows. 12 years of marriage, 12 years of hearing variations of the same phrase. In the beginning of their relationship, the criticisms were subtle, disguised as concern. Over time, they became more direct, more cruel. "You don't know what you're talking about," Elisa muttered, bending down to pick up her sheet music. "The workshop teacher said my compositions have potential. He even suggested I send a demo to..." "For what? To be rejected for the 1,000th time?" Richard interrupted, his voice dripping with disdain. "Remember that talent show in 2018? You didn't even make it past the first round. Or that church choir audition? They picked that 16-year-old girl over you." Elisa closed her eyes, memories of past rejections mixing with the weariness of the journey. "Things are different now. I'm getting better, learning. At 34? Be realistic. People who make it big in music start at 15, not 34. Richard picked up his glass of whiskey again. "The problem is you live in this fantasy. You've always been like that ever since I met you. Always thinking you're special, that you have something to say to the world." He took a sip, watching her over the rim of his glass. "But you're not. You're as ordinary as anyone else in this town. The difference is that other people accept that." Outside, a clap of thunder announced the approach of a storm. Perfect timing with the storm brewing inside the Mason house. Elisa finished gathering up her sheet music, clutching it to her chest as if she could protect not only the paper, but the dream they represented. "You're wrong," she said, her voice low but firm. "I'm not chasing fame or fortune. I'm following my passion, something you clearly don't understand. Passion doesn't pay the bills, Elisa. Passion doesn't build a future." Richard leaned in close again, his expensive cologne mingling with the scent of whiskey. "While you're playing songwriter in Nashville, I'm here working the real thing, supporting this household. I work too. I work over 40 hours a week in that office, listening to numbers that mean nothing to me, and you should be grateful for that. How many people would kill for a steady job like yours, but no, you need this. This escape, this childish fantasy." The rain began to fall outside, heavy and insistent. Elisa felt the first tears forming, but she took a deep breath, refusing to cry in front of him. "Not this time. I'm going to the guest room tonight," she announced, turning toward the stairs. Of course you will. Escape from reality. As always. Richard's bitter laugh followed her upstairs. Maybe you should write a song about that. About how pathetic it is to keep chasing a dream that will never happen. Elisa closed the guest room door, finally allowing the tears to fall. On the wall, an old guitar that had belonged to his father hung, dusty from disuse. She picked it up, gently plucking the worn strings. As the storm raged through Memphis, Elisa Mason began to play, softly, a melody she had composed that afternoon in Nashville. A song about freedom, about breaking chains, about the price of dreaming in a world that constantly tries to wake you up. Memphis, with its heavy air of musical history and blues on the street corners, was both a constant reminder of Elisa's dream and a silent witness to her emotional prison. The city that had seen Elvis rise from the shadows to immortality, that had heard B.B. King make his Lucille guitar cry, now watched Elisa Mason waste away in a marriage that seemed to suck her soul with every criticism, every belittlement. At Precision Accounting, where Elisa had worked as a senior administrative assistant for 8 years, no one could have guessed what life she led at home. There, dressed in carefully selected blazers and smiling politely at clients, she was efficiency personified. Her boss, Susan, often commented on how Elisa had mathematical precision and military organization. "You should be a partner, not an assistant," Susan said one morning as they reviewed financial reports. "Have you considered becoming a CPA?" Elisa smiled, adjusting the glasses she wore only for work. "Sometimes," she lied. In truth, she had never considered a career in accounting. The job was just that, a job, a means to an end that, honestly, she could no longer clearly see. Richard Mason, on the other hand, had built his identity around his career. As a regional sales manager for a pharmaceutical company, he was in constant competition, with colleagues, with other companies, with himself. Tall, athletically built even at 38, Richard cultivated the image of the successful American. House in the suburbs, German car in the garage, expensive watches, tailored suits. He had not been born into privilege. The son of a mechanic and a supermarket cashier in a small Mississippi town, Richard grew up determined to never again feel the financial strain that had marked his childhood. Every penny saved, every promotion earned, every status symbol acquired was a victory over his past. And Elisa, with her impractical dreams, posed a threat to that hard-won victory. "The money you spend on those singing lessons could be going into our retirement fund," was one of his favorite sayings, usually accompanied by an expression of fatherly disappointment, as if he were explaining basic math to a child. What Richard never mentioned was how much his hobbies cost. The golf club, the Cuban cigars, the business dinners that often stretched late into the night. In the Masons' emotional economy, his spending was an investment. Hers was a waste. Then there was Janie, Elisa's younger sister, living in Los Angeles. At 29, Janie worked as a sound technician in recording studios, living the life Elisa secretly wanted for herself. The two kept in touch frequently through text messages and video calls whenever Richard wasn't around. "He doesn't know about the workshop yet, right?" Janie asked in their last conversation 2 weeks ago. "No, and you won't know," Elisa replied, glancing nervously at the bedroom door. Even though she knew Richard was playing golf that afternoon. "Elisa, this isn't healthy. Hiding things from your husband, living in fear of his reaction. It's not fear, it's preserving peace." Janie sighed, her face on the phone screen showing a concern that words could not adequately express. "This is not peace, sister. It is silence. There is a difference." Besides her family, Elisa had few close friends. The most constant was Marcella, whom she had known since college, a time when Elisa was still singing in university bars and openly dreaming of a musical career. Marcella, now a high school English teacher and mother of 2, kept alive the memory of that younger, braver Elisa. "Do you remember that night at the Blue Note?" Marcella asked over lunch 3 days after her confrontation with Richard about Nashville. "You walked up on that tiny stage and sang 'Killing Me Softly' like you were born to do it." Everyone went silent. Even the bartender stopped serving drinks. Elisa smiled at the memory. "I was drunk on courage and tequila." "No, you were in your element." That was the real Elisa. The real Elisa. Who was she now? The competent administrative assistant? The submissive wife? The secret dreamer who sneaked to workshops in Nashville? At home, His music and compositions were hidden in an encrypted folder on his laptop. His musical notes, disguised as working drafts. His true voice reserved for moments of absolute solitude. And then there was Nashville. Just 4 hours away, the city represented everything Elisa simultaneously longed for and feared. During a songwriting workshop, she had met Marcus Reeves, a veteran music producer who recognized something in her songs. "You have an authentic voice," he had said, studying her scores. "I'm not talking about your physical voice, although that's good too. I'm talking about your voice as a composer. You tell stories that need to be heard." Those words echoed in Elisa's mind as she prepared for another day at the office, a week after her argument with Richard. In the mirror, she watched the 34-year-old woman who stared back at her. Carefully styled brown hair, understated makeup, small pearl earrings, gifts from Richard on their 5th wedding anniversary. "You have an authentic voice," she repeated to her reflection, almost in a whisper. From downstairs, Richard called, "Elisa, coffee is ready. If you don't come down in 5 minutes, I'll be late for the investor meeting." She took a deep breath, adjusted her pearl earrings, and replied, "I'm coming down." Her voice, as always at home, controlled and subdued. A perfect performance for an audience of one. Conflict development. On the 3rd Friday in May, Elisa's phone buzzed during Precision Accounting's quarterly meeting. A message from Marcus Reeves. "I've shown your demo to a few contacts. Real interest from Blue Ridge Records. Can we talk tonight?" Her heart was racing so fast she had to put her hand to her chest, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed by Susan, who raised a questioning eyebrow from across the conference table. Elisa smiled nervously and put her phone away, trying to focus on the financial projections projected on the screen. But her mind was miles away on the implications of that message. Blue Ridge Records, a respected independent label in Nashville. Real interest. The words danced in his mind. After work that afternoon, Elisa drove to Riverfront Park, one of her city haunts. Sitting on a bench overlooking the majestic Mississippi River, she finally called Marcus back. "They loved Cages We Build," Marcus explained, referring to the lead track on the 3-song demo Elisa had recorded in a small Memphis studio, in furtive sessions during overtime at work. "They want to meet you, talk about possibilities." Possibilities? The word sounded both wonderful and terrifying. A 5 or 6 track EP to start. If the reception is good, a full album later. Marcus's voice was brimming with enthusiasm. "Elisa, that's rare for an unestablished artist, especially someone with no social media presence or prior fan base." "I need to think," she replied, watching a boat slowly pass by on the river. In truth, she was thinking about Richard, about his reaction. "Don't take too long. They have other people in line, but you're their first choice for this particular project. They need an answer by Thursday. 5 days. 5 days to make a decision that could change your life completely. 5 days to find courage." That evening, Richard came home feeling particularly excited. He had just closed an important contract, guaranteeing him a substantial bonus. "I'm thinking about upgrading my car," he announced over dinner, as he methodically cut into the steak Elisa had prepared. "Maybe a BMW 5 Series. What do you think?" Elisa played with the food on her plate, her hunger dulled by anxiety. "It looks expensive." "It's an investment. Appearance matters in my job. Besides," he smiled, that rare smile that reminded Elisa of the man she'd fallen in love with so many years ago. "We can afford it. My promotion to general manager is practically guaranteed." "That's wonderful, Richard." She forced enthusiasm into her voice. It was wonderful to him. "We need to celebrate. I've already booked a table at Le Chateau for tomorrow night. Just the two of us." He reached across the table for her hand, squeezing it gently. "You know, I've been hard on you lately. I only want the best for us, for our future." Elisa swallowed, feeling simultaneously touched by the unusual gesture of affection and stifled by the irony of the situation. "I know." Later, while Richard watched a basketball game in the living room, Elisa locked herself in the bathroom, turned on the shower to drown out the sound, and called Janie. "It's the opportunity you've always wanted," Janie says immediately after hearing the news. "You can't refuse." "It's not that simple. Richard would never accept it, and our marriage is already hanging by a thread." "Elisa," Janie's voice turned serious, "if your marriage depends on you giving up your dreams, what kind of marriage is it?" The question hung between them, loaded with truths that Elisa had been avoiding for years. On Monday, she tried to broach the subject with Richard indirectly. "I've been thinking," he began over breakfast, "maybe I need a career change." Richard looked up from his newspaper. "What's wrong with your current job? The pay is good, the benefits are excellent, and you have stability." "Yes, but I don't feel fulfilled. Maybe I could explore something more creative." The skepticism on his face was immediate. "Creative as what exactly?" "I don't know. Maybe something related to music, production, composition." Richard put down the newspaper, his face hardening. "I thought we were past that, Elisa. I thought after our conversation about Nashville, you'd have understood the reality." "What reality, Richard? That I have to give up something I love because you don't approve? The reality that we have bills to pay? The reality that we are adults with responsibilities, not teenagers chasing fantasies?" He sighed, as if explaining something obvious to a stubborn child. "Look, we're in a good place. My promotion is coming up. Your reviews at work are excellent. In a few years, we'll be able to buy a bigger house, maybe even a vacation home in Florida. Why risk all that on a whim?" "It's not a whim." Elisa's voice shook slightly. "It's part of who I am. Part of who you were, maybe, in college. But people grow up, Elisa. They evolve. They leave behind childish dreams and build real lives." He glanced at his watch and stood up. "I have to go. We have that strategy meeting today." When the door closed behind him, Elisa remained seated, Richard's words echoing in her mind, mixing with Marcus's, Janie's, her own doubts and hopes. On Tuesday, 2 days before the deadline, Marcus called again. "They're offering an advance, $15,000 for 5 tracks plus royalties." His voice was brimming with excitement. "Elisa, this isn't just a door ajar. They're rolling out a red carpet for you." That night, Elisa sat in the guest room with her guitar, the folder with the Blue Ridge Records contract on the bed. The words on the legal pages seemed blurred through her unshed tears. One chance. A real chance. Maybe the only one I would have. Her fingers found the chords of "Cages We Build," the song that had captured the record label's attention. The irony was not lost on her. A song about freedom from self-inflicted imprisonment had sparked interest just when she felt most trapped. "What are you doing here?" Richard's voice came from the door, which she had forgotten to lock. He was still wearing his business suit, his tie slightly loosened. Elisa froze, her fingers still on the guitar strings. "I was practicing." Richard's eyes fell on the papers on the bed. "What's this?" Before she could respond, he had crossed the room and picked up the contract. Elisa watched his face change as he read it. Confusion, then understanding, then cold anger. "Blue Ridge Records," he read aloud. "Recording contract." His eyes met hers. "When exactly were you going to tell me about this?" The moment of truth had come before Elisa was ready. Yet something inside her, that authentic voice that Marcus had recognized, finally refused to hide. "I'm considering taking it," she said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "It's a real opportunity, Richard. A chance to do something that matters to me. What about our plans, our life together? Doesn't that matter to you?" "It does matter, but shouldn't there be room for both?" Elisa stood up, still holding the guitar like a shield. "Why do I have to choose between my marriage and my passion?" Richard tossed the contract back onto the bed. "Because some crushes are self-destructive fantasies, Elisa. Because I've watched you hurt yourself over and over again chasing something that's never going to happen." "But it's happening, right now." She pointed to the contract. "They believe in me, in my music. They believe in the money they can make selling a fantasy. That's what the music industry is all about. They'll use you and then discard you when they find out you don't have what it takes." The words hit Elisa like poisoned arrows, triggering every insecurity she had fought to overcome. Yet for the first time, she saw Richard's wounds too. The fear of failure that drove him, the terror of losing control, the scars of a childhood of scarcity. "You're wrong," she said simply. "This time you're wrong." The next day, Memphis was hit by one of the worst storms of the spring. The rain fell in sheets of opaque water, turning the streets into temporary streams. At Precision Accounting, the ceiling of the filing cabinet leaked, creating an administrative emergency that kept Elisa busy all morning. 5 years' worth of tax documents being threatened by water, Susan muttered, eyeing the ceiling with a sour expression. "The building owner is going to hear about this." While organizing folders on higher shelves, protecting them from the water, Elisa received a message from Marcella. "I got the tickets for the festival. Don't say you're canceling again." The Memphis Blues Festival. Elisa had completely forgotten about it. She had promised Marcella months ago that they would go together this year, after having canceled for 3 years in a row due to commitments with Richard. "I'll be there," he replied, in a fit of rebellion. Small acts of disobedience were becoming easier after the confrontation of the previous night. During lunch, hiding in her car in the parking lot to escape the curious eyes of her colleagues, Elisa called Marcus. "I'll accept the offer," he announced, surprising himself with his own decision. "But I need to know exactly what that means in practical terms. How much time in the studio? Will I have to move to Nashville?" The conversation with Marcus was surprisingly comforting. The label didn't expect her to quit her job immediately. Recordings could be scheduled on weekends, with a few intensive weeks during her vacation. It was a workable arrangement, Elisa thought. A gradual transition. "That's music to my ears," Marcus joked. "No pun intended. I'll have everything ready for us to sign on Friday." Friday. The next day. Elisa's heart raced. It would happen too soon, before she had a chance to prepare Richard properly. But maybe it was for the best. Maybe presenting him with a fait accompli was the only way. That evening, she arrived home to find Richard absent. A note on the refrigerator read, "Business dinner with Japanese investors. Don't wait up for me." The relief she felt was immediately followed by guilt. How had they gotten to this point where her spouse's absence was a cause for celebration? Taking advantage of the empty house, Elisa called her sister. "I'll sign the contract tomorrow," she announced, a mixture of terror and excitement in her voice. "What about Richard?" "I'll tell you later, when it's done." The silence on the other end was significant. "Janie, I'm worried about you, Lisa. Not about the contract. That's amazing. I'm worried about your situation at home. We'll get through this. Richard will understand eventually." "Really? Do you really believe that?" The question hung in the air, uncomfortable as the Memphis humidity after rain. Meanwhile, at a downtown Japanese restaurant, Richard Mason was grappling with his own dilemmas. The investor meeting had ended an hour ago, but he remained at the bar, knocking back shots of sake while reviewing Elisa's monthly credit card statement on his phone. Nashville Soundwork Studio, $250. Date, 3 weeks ago. Music composition. Workshop, $175. Date, 1 month ago. Marcus Reeves. Productions, $350. Date, 6 weeks ago. The list continued, revealing a spending pattern that Elisa had carefully hidden. Richard felt a wave of betrayal. It wasn't just the money, although that bothered him too, but the dishonesty, the secrets. "Can I keep you company?" A female voice interrupted his thoughts. Amber Chen, the representative of the Japanese investors, slid onto the bench next to him. Tall, elegant in her gray suit, her black hair falling in a perfect line to her shoulders. "I thought you already went to the hotel," Richard replied, locking his phone screen. "I decided one more drink wouldn't hurt." She signaled to the bartender. "Problems at home? Is it that obvious? You have that look. I've seen it before. In the mirror, after my divorce." 2 hours and many shots of sake later, Richard found himself pouring out his heart to Amber about Elisa's musical ambitions, about what he perceived as a self-destructive fantasy, about his fear that she would throw away the security they had built together. "Do you know what my ex-husband's mistake was?" Amber asked, her eyes slightly blurred from the alcohol. "He thought he could stop me from growing up, that he could keep me in the same box he knew me in." "It's not the same thing," Richard protested. "I'm not stopping Elisa from growing up, I'm protecting her from getting hurt." "Are you sure? Or are you protecting yourself from the possibility that she'll find out she doesn't need you?" The question hit Richard like a punch to the gut. He tossed some bills on the counter and stood abruptly. "I have to go." On the way home, driving through the returning rain, Amber's words echoed in her mind, mixing with memories of her own past. Her father, a gruff, practical man, had ridiculed her teenage dream of becoming an architect. "People like us fix buildings, they don't design them." Had he been realistic or cruel, protective or controlling? The lines were blurred in Richard's memory, just like the lines on the road ahead, obscured by the rain and the haze of alcohol in his system. When he got home, it was after midnight. The light in the guest room was still on, a thin golden line beneath the door. He hesitated in the hallway, listening. Elisa was singing softly, accompanied by the quiet sound of her guitar. The song was new, one he had never heard before. For a moment, Richard was transported back 12 years, to the night he had met Elisa in a small bar in Oxford, Mississippi. She had performed that night, her voice filling the room with an intensity that had taken his breath away. It was that voice, that passion, that had first made him fall in love. When had he begun to fear that same passion? Quietly, Richard made his way to the master bedroom, closing the door behind him. In the darkness, he pulled out his cell phone and, after a moment's hesitation, typed a message to Amber. "Tomorrow, 9 a.m., my office. We need to go over the terms before the meeting with head office." Professional, distant, as if the last few hours hadn't happened, as if he hadn't revealed more about his marriage to a stranger in one night than he'd pondered alone in years. In the next room, unaware of Richard's return, Elisa finished the new song she had been writing for the past few hours, a song about standing on the edge of a cliff ready to leap into the unknown. She titled it Leap of Faith. On his laptop screen, Marcus Reeves's email was still open. "Tomorrow, 10 a.m., Crossroads Studios in Nashville. Bring your guitar and vocals. We'll take care of the rest." 2 commitments, 2 possible directions. The storm continued to punish Memphis, as if the sky itself was undecided between washing everything away or simply drowning it. Turning Point Friday morning brought clear, bright skies, as if the previous night's storm had never happened. Elisa woke up before her alarm, her heart racing with the decision she had made. She left the guest room to find the house silent. In the kitchen, a solitary cup of coffee sat on the sink and another note on the refrigerator. "Morning meeting. Shall we have lunch together today? I thought about the Italian you like. R." The almost casual tone, the suggestion of normalcy after weeks of tension, caught Elisa off guard. For a moment she hesitated. Maybe there was a less drastic way out. Maybe they could talk. Really talk about the contract, about their dreams, about a compromise that would allow space for both of them. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "All set for today. Nervous?" Nervous didn't begin to describe the turmoil in her chest. She responded with a smiley face emoji, unable to put her feelings into words. At 8:30, dressed in a formal business suit so as not to arouse suspicion, Elisa left the house with her guitar in the trunk and a small carry-on containing a few clothes. The plan was simple. Drive to Nashville, sign the contract, spend the weekend working with Marcus on arrangements for his songs, and return on Sunday night, confronting Richard with the fait accompli. Halfway to Nashville, as she drove down Interstate 40, her phone rang. Richard's name flashed on the car's screen. Elisa hesitated, her finger hovering over the answer button on the steering wheel. Finally, she let the call go to voicemail. Almost immediately, his phone dinged with a text message. "Where are you? Susan said you didn't come into work today." Elisa's stomach sank. She hadn't planned for this properly. Of course, Richard would check with Susan. The two had known each other for years, ever since Elisa started at Precision Accounting. Another whistle. "I called Marcella. She doesn't know where you are. What's going on, Elisa?" And then, as if the universe was determined to test her resolve, the cell phone rang again. This time it was Susan. "Elisa?" Her boss's voice sounded worried when she finally answered. "Is everything okay?" "Richard seems quite nervous." "I'm fine, Susan. I just had to take care of an urgent personal matter. I should have let you know, I'm sorry." "Did he mention anything about Nashville?" Elisa's heart skipped a beat. "What exactly did Richard say?" "He asked if you'd mentioned a trip to Nashville. When I said no, he got weird. He mumbled something about she actually went to do that and hung up." "Elisa, what's going on?" Through the rearview mirror, Elisa noticed a silver car gaining speed, approaching quickly. A BMW, like Richard's. "Susan, I have to go. I'll call you later." Was it paranoia? Elisa accelerated slightly, overtaking a truck. The BMW did the same. When she slowed down, the BMW also slowed down, maintaining a constant distance. It was him. Somehow, Richard had discovered his plans. Maybe he had seen Marcus's email on his laptop. Maybe he had overheard his conversation with Janie. It didn't matter now. What mattered was that he was following her. And judging by the way he was driving, a little too fast, a little too close to the other cars, he wasn't calm. Elisa took the next exit, veering off the route to Nashville. The BMW followed. Rather than confront him on the highway, she decided to stop at a gas station. Better to face the situation now, in a public place. As soon as he parked, the BMW pulled up beside his car. Richard got out, his face a mask of suppressed anger and something else. Hurt, perhaps. "What are you doing?" he asked as soon as she got out of the car, his voice controlled but shaky. I think you already know. Nashville. The contract. He ran his hand through his hair, a gesture she knew well. His sign of extreme frustration. Were you just going to disappear? Without a word? I was going to tell you when I got back. Sunday. And that makes it all better? Presenting me with a fait accompli? Elisa crossed her arms, suddenly aware that they were in the middle of a gas station somewhere in Tennessee, potentially creating a scene. How did you know? I saw your email last night when I got home. You left your laptop open in the guest room. Were you snooping around my computer? No, He stopped, composing himself. I went to check on you. You were asleep and the screen was on. I couldn't help but look. An uncomfortable silence settled between them, filled only by the sound of cars passing by on the nearby highway, and the occasional bell from the convenience store announcing new customers. Why, Elisa? Richard's voice was softer now, almost defeated. Why would you do this behind my back? Because you never gave me the chance to do otherwise. The emotion Elisa had been suppressing finally boiled over. Every time I mention music, you belittle me. You ridicule my dreams, make me feel foolish for still having hope. I'm trying to protect you. Of what? Of being happy? Of trying something that matters to me? Of getting hurt? Of being rejected, used and discarded by an industry that chews people up and spits out the remains? An elderly couple passing by looked at them curiously, causing Elisa to lower her voice. That's the point, Richard. It's my choice to risk it. My choice to try, even though I know I might fail. Richard stepped forward, his eyes fixed on hers. What about our marriage, our life together? Is that your choice to throw away too? The question hit Elisa like a physical punch. I'm not throwing anything away, I'm trying to find a balance. What balance? You are literally running away from home to sign a contract that will completely change your life without even consulting me. Elisa realized he was right, at least partly. Her approach had been cowardly. You're right. I should have talked to you first. But would you have listened? Really listened without judgment, without trying to talk me out of it? Richard opened his mouth to respond but closed it again. The answer was in his silence. That's why I did it this way, Elisa continued more softly. Because I didn't see any other way out. There's always another way out, Elisa. We can always talk. No, Richard, we can't. Not anymore. She took a deep breath, gathering her courage for the words that needed to be said. For the past few years, every conversation about my music has ended with you telling me I'm foolish, naive, that I'll never be good enough. You'll never amount to anything, remember? Your exact words. Richard blinked as if he had been slapped. I was angry. I didn't mean. I did. And I kept saying it in different ways for years. Elisa felt tears forming, but refused to shed them. Do you know what Marcus said when he heard my songs? He said I have an authentic voice, that I tell stories that need to be heard. And you believe him? A stranger who makes money selling dreams to people desperate for validation? See? That's what I'm talking about. Elisa threw her hands up in exasperation. You can't imagine that anyone could genuinely appreciate what I do, that I could have real talent. Richard looked at the ground, then at the sky, then back at her. Something in his face had changed. A grim resolve had set in. I'm not going to stop you, he said finally. If you want to go to Nashville, sign that contract, pursue that dream, go ahead. Elisa felt a chill run down her spine. It wasn't a concession. It was an ultimatum in disguise. But, she pressed, knowing there was more. But don't expect me to be there when it inevitably falls apart. I can't watch you self-destruct, Elisa. Are you giving me an ultimatum? The contract or our marriage? I'm being realistic. This is not a passing phase. It's a decision that will fundamentally change who you are, how you live. And it's not the life we agreed to build together. Elisa felt as if the ground was disappearing beneath her feet. For years, she had imagined what it would be like to finally pursue her musical dream. None of those fantasies included losing Richard in the process. It doesn't have to be this way, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. We can make it work. Shooting hours are flexible. I can keep my job for now. Until when? Until the first show? The first tour? The first album that will require you to be on the road for months? Richard shook his head. I know you, Elisa. Once you taste that, there will be no going back. You won't settle for half the dream. He was right again, and that scared her more than anything. Maybe he knew her better than she knew herself. So what do we do now? She asked, feeling simultaneously exhausted and hyper-alert. as if every moment of that conversation was being burned into her memory with painful clarity. "Your decision," Richard replied simply. "Nashville or Memphis? Your dream or our life?" The ultimatum was on the table, now explicitly. Elisa looked at her car, at the guitar visible in the back seat, at the small suitcase containing a few clothes for the weekend. Then she looked at Richard, the man she had loved for 12 years, with whom she had built a life. "I have to go," she said finally. "They're waiting." "The contract?" Richard's expression hardened again, but he nodded. "So you've chosen." "I'm not choosing anything definitive, Richard. I'm asking for space to try. But that's what you don't understand, Elisa." His voice was oddly calm now. "Some choices are final the moment they're made. Not because they have to be, but because they change you in ways that can't be undone." He turned toward his car, then stopped and looked back at her. "I'm going back to Memphis. Do what you need to do in Nashville. When you get back, well, we'll see where we are." It wasn't exactly a closed door, but it wasn't completely open either. Elisa nodded, unable to find words suitable for the moment. As she watched Richard's BMW disappear down the highway toward Memphis, Elisa felt a strange mix of terror and freedom. It was as if she had jumped out of an airplane and didn't yet know if the parachute would open. She got into her car and reset the GPS. Nashville, 112 miles ahead. Her hand shook as she started the engine. "An authentic voice," she muttered to herself, repeating Marcus's words like a mantra. "Stories that need to be heard." The asphalt stretched out before her, glistening in the morning sun. Two paths diverged in a yellow forest. She had chosen the one less traveled by, and that, as the poem said, would make all the difference. The first chords of "Leap of Faith" resounded throughout the Crossroads studio, enveloping those present in an almost hypnotic atmosphere. Marcus Reeves bobbed his head gently to the beat, while Blue Ridge Records executive Carter Blackwell kept his eyes closed, completely absorbed. When Elisa finished the last note, silence persisted for a few seconds before anyone spoke. That was... Carter hesitated, as if searching for the exact word. "Transcendent." Elisa blushed, still not used to receiving genuine praise for her music. "Thank you. I wrote it last night." "You wrote this yesterday?" Marcus looked impressed. "And it's already at this level of refinement?" "The music had been in me for a long time," Elisa explained, adjusting the guitar on her lap. "I just needed to find the right words." 3 hours later, with the ink still fresh on her signature on the contract, Elisa walked out of the label building feeling as if she were floating. A $15,000 advance had been transferred to her account. A recording schedule for the next 2 months had been set. A team of professionals was ready to work on her songs. Dream and reality had merged in a way she could barely process. Sitting in a nearby cafe, Elisa finally checked her phone, which she had kept on silent during the meeting. 3 missed calls from Richard, 1 from Janie, 2 texts from Marcella asking where she was, reminding her of the blues festival that night. The real world, with its complications and demands, waited for her on the other side of the euphoria. Elisa took a deep breath and called Richard. He answered on the second ring. "Did you sign?" His voice sounded neutral, controlled. "Try." A heavy silence. "Congratulations, then." The tone was hard to interpret, sincere or sarcastic. "Richard, about what happened earlier. I don't want to discuss this over the phone, Elisa. I'm heading back to Memphis tomorrow. Can we talk then? If that's what you want." The formality in his voice was painful. "I have to go. I have a video conference in 5 minutes." Before Elisa could respond, the call ended. She stared at the phone, her chest tightening. The joy of just a few minutes ago was now tainted by the reality that her marriage might not survive this choice. She called Janie next. "So, how was it?" his sister asked immediately. "I signed the contract. They loved Leap of Faith. We're going to put it on the EP." "That's amazing, Lisa. I'm so proud of you." Janie pauses. "What about Richard?" Elisa told about the confrontation at the gas station, about the veiled ultimatum. "He's bluffing," Janie declared confidently. "When he realizes this is real, that you really have talent and aren't just living a fantasy, he'll change his mind." "I'm not so sure. You didn't see his expression, Janie. It was as if I had betrayed something fundamental between us." "Maybe he does," Janie replies softly. "His control over you." It was a harsh assessment, but Elisa couldn't entirely refute it. Their relationship had always been based on certain assumptions, that she was the impulsive dreamer, he the protective realist. that she needed his guidance, he her admiration. By signing this contract, she had rejected those established dynamics. "How long are you staying in Nashville?" Janie asked, changing the subject. "I'll be back tomorrow. They want me to come back next weekend to start filming for real." "And your work?" "I haven't thought about it yet." Elisa bit her lip. "I think I'll take a few weeks of accumulated vacation to start. After that, I don't know. One step at a time, right?" Janie sounded encouraging. "Today, you simply celebrate this accomplishment. The rest, you figure out tomorrow." After hanging up, Elisa ordered another coffee and opened her songbook. The pages were filled with incomplete verses, scribbled chords, ideas for songs that now had a chance to come to life. A sense of purpose filled her. Regardless of what happened to her marriage, this part of her identity was finally being honored. Meanwhile, in Memphis, Richard Mason sat in his office, staring at his computer screen without really seeing what was written. The video conference had ended 20 minutes ago, but he remained motionless, lost in thought. A soft knock on the door interrupted his trance. Amber Chen walked in, carrying a few folders. "The reports you asked for," she said, placing them on the table. Then, noticing his expression, she asked, "Is everything okay?" "Not really." The words escaped before Richard could stop them. Amber sat in the chair across from her desk, her dark eyes showing genuine concern. "Do you want to talk about it?" "I promise I'm a better listener sober than I am drunk." Richard almost smiled at the reference to the night before. Elisa signed the contract. "With the record company." "Ah." Amber nodded slowly. "And how do you feel about that?" "Betrayed. Angry. Worried." He sighed, running a hand over his face. "And somehow also relieved. Like a time bomb had finally gone off. Maybe because it was inevitable. Like this?" Amber chose her words carefully. "From what you told me last night, it sounded like the two of you had been living parallel lives for a while. Her with her secret dreams, you with your rigid expectations. Something had to give eventually." Richard considered this for a moment. "I met Elisa when she was singing in a college bar. I remember thinking she was the most alive, most authentic person I had ever met." He stared off into the distance. It was as if the rest of the world was in black and white, and she was the only person in color. What changed? Real life happened. Jobs, mortgage, plans for the future, responsibilities. And music doesn't fit into these plans? Richard frowned. "It's not that simple. The music industry is brutal. For every person who succeeds, thousands fail spectacularly." He paused. "And Elisa, she's had rejections before. I've seen how they affected her, how they broke her. I'm just trying to spare her that." "Are you sure that's all it is?" Amber tilted her head, watching him closely. "Or is there some part of you that fears what will happen if she actually succeeds?" The question struck Richard like a revealing bolt of lightning, illuminating parts of himself that he had kept in the dark. He opened his mouth to protest, but found no words. Amber stood, adjusting her impeccable pencil skirt. "Just something to think about. The investors will be here at 4. Should I bring the revised projections?" Richard nodded mechanically, his mind still processing the question she had left hanging in the air like expensive perfume. What did he really fear? Elisa's failure or her success? That evening, while Richard ate dinner alone in the dining room that suddenly seemed too big, Elisa sat in a small rehearsal room in the back of Crossroads Studio. Marcus had gathered a few session musicians to start working on arrangements for his songs. The chemistry was instant. His songs, once limited to voice and acoustic guitar, took on new dimensions with the addition of bass, drums, and piano. "This is..." Elisa paused, overcome with emotion, after they finished a trial version of Cages We Build. "Magician?" suggested the drummer, a man named Devin with tattooed arms and a gentle smile. "Yes," she smiled. "Exactly." Marcus watched from the corner, clearly pleased. "We'll bring the producer in tomorrow so we can start defining the final sound. If we keep this up, we can have 2 tracks completely finished by the end of next weekend." The enthusiasm was contagious, and for a few hours Elisa was able to forget the uncertain future that awaited her in Memphis. Here, in this room with people who spoke her musical language, she felt at home. Later, in the small hotel near the studio, reality returned. Lying in bed, Elisa looked at the wedding ring on her left hand. 12 years. 12 years of shared life, of shared history. Could she really be willing to lose all that for a dream? But then another question arose. Could he really go on living without at least trying? without finding out if he had what it took to turn his talent into something he could share with the world. Richard had presented her with a false choice, Elisa realized. The real choice was not between marriage and music. It was between living authentically or continuing to exist in the shadows of unrealized possibilities. Her phone vibrated with a message. Marcella, I missed you at the festival. How are you? Guilt added to already tumultuous emotions. She had completely forgotten about the blues festival, despite having promised Marcella she would be there. As I typed out an apology, another message arrived. Richard, we need to talk about practical arrangements when you get back. I've rented a storage room to store some of my things. Elisa's stomach sank. He was bracing himself for a breakup. This was real. It was happening. She tried calling him, but he didn't answer. She texted him asking what exactly he meant by practical arrangements, but got no reply. The night stretched on, long and restless. The successes of the day, the contract, the accolades, the music coming to life, now seemed distant, like stars shining too far away to provide warmth. The next morning, before starting the trip back to Memphis, Elisa called Susan. I need 2 weeks vacation, he announced without preamble. Personal emergency. Elisa, what's going on? Richard showed up here yesterday looking like a ghost. You disappear without warning, and now this. It's complicated, Susan. I promise to explain everything when I get back. But right now, I really need this time. There was a pause on the other end. It's something to do with music, isn't it? Richard mentioned something about it yesterday. Partially, Elisa admitted. I signed a record deal in Nashville. Wow. Susan sounded genuinely impressed. That's unexpected and amazing. You think so? Elisa couldn't hide the surprise in her voice. Of course, I always knew you were talented. Remember that Christmas party in 2019 when you sang after a few glasses of champagne? We were all impressed. The memory made Elisa smile. She had forgotten about that moment, a rare occasion when Richard was at a conference, and she had felt free to be more authentic at the company party. Thank you, Susan. You don't know how much this means to me. Vacation is approved. 2 weeks. But I want to hear all about this label when you get back. Talking to Susan added a small spark of hope to Elisa's day. At least one person in her life saw her musical talent as a positive thing, not a threat or a childish whim. On the road to Memphis, she sang, loudly. The entire car vibrated with her freeing voice, each note carrying years of pent-up emotion. It was as if every mile home brought her closer to a truer version of herself, even if that version might no longer have a place in the marriage that had defined her adult life. Her time in Memphis took on a surreal quality for Elisa. The house she shared with Richard, once a space of unspoken tension, had now become an emotional minefield where every object, every room, carried the weight of 12 years of shared history. The first night after his return from Nashville, Richard slept in the guest room. They had barely exchanged 10 words during the silent dinner he had insisted on preparing, as if following normal routines could somehow preserve the illusion of normalcy. When does filming start? He finally asked as he washed the dishes. Next weekend. Elisa dried the glasses meticulously, giving each one exaggerated attention. I'll go Friday morning, come back Sunday night. And then? It depends on the progress, maybe a few more weekends. Then when the tracks are ready, I'll need to spend some time there for mixing, mastering, that kind of thing. Richard nodded mechanically. And your job? I took 2 weeks off to start. After that, I don't know yet. He turned off the faucet, drying his hands on the dish towel. His eyes finally met hers. Is this what our lives have become then? You in Nashville chasing your dream, me here in Memphis? The question hung in the air like smoke, suffocating in its intensity. It doesn't have to be that way, Richard. Many couples make it work with careers in different cities. Is that what you want? A weekend wedding? What I want, Elisa replied carefully, is a chance to discover who I am when I'm not living for other people's approval. Her voice grew firm. And what do you want, Richard? Do you really want it? A wife who suppresses fundamental parts of herself to fit into your vision of the perfect life? He didn't answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. I just wanted us to be happy together. Me too. But I can't pretend to be happy anymore by giving up on my dreams. Richard retreated to the guest room soon after, leaving Elisa alone with tumultuous thoughts and an uncertain future. On Monday, she called Marcus to discuss arrangements for the following weekend. The conversation was a breath of fresh air. He was excited about new arrangement ideas. They had managed to book a renowned violinist for one of the tracks. The record executive was still impressed with Leap of Faith. Oh, and there's one more thing, Marcus added before hanging up. A little bar called the Bluebird Cafe is looking for someone to fill in for an artist who canceled on Thursday night. I mentioned your name and they're interested. It'd be a 30-minute set, nothing too elaborate. A chance to play your songs for an audience before we go into the studio. Elisa's heart raced. The Bluebird Cafe was legendary in Nashville, a small but influential venue where many important artists had been discovered. But it's so last minute, I'm not sure I can organize everything. Think of it as a dress rehearsal, Marcus encouraged. Just you and your guitar like old times. The songs you already know by heart. After hanging up, Elisa stood in the kitchen, torn between excitement and panic. A real show, in Nashville, at the Bluebird Cafe. Without thinking much, she picked up the phone and called the person she most wanted to share the news with. Janie, can you believe I'm playing at the Bluebird Cafe this Thursday? Her sister's squeal of joy was contagious. That's huge, Lisa. I'm going to buy a ticket right now. I wouldn't miss your debut for anything. The idea of having Janie in the audience calmed some of Elisa's nervousness. Marcella was also excited when she heard, promising to attend a future performance when Elisa is playing arenas. There was only one person left to complete her circle of support. Gathering her courage, Elisa knocked on Richard's office door that night. Can I come in? He was sitting at his desk, surrounded by work papers. Sure, I have news. She tried to keep her voice neutral, not betraying her excitement. I'm playing at the Bluebird Cafe in Nashville this Thursday. It's a small but very respected venue for emerging musicians. Richard stared at her for a long moment, his face unreadable. Congratulations, he finally said. I thought maybe, Elisa hesitated. Maybe you'd like to go. It could be a chance to see that side of my life, to understand why it means so much to me. The offer hung between them like a fragile bridge over troubled waters. Richard seemed to be genuinely considering it. Then, slowly, he shook his head. I don't think that's a good idea, Elisa. Not right now. I'm still processing all of this. The rejection hurt more than she expected. I understand. I hope it's good, he added, his tone softer. Really, it was something at least. A small acknowledgement. Elisa nodded and left, closing the door softly behind her. The next few days passed in a blur of preparations. Elisa practiced obsessively, refining her repertoire for the show. She selected 5 songs, Cages We Build and Leap of Faith, which were already part of the EP project, and 3 older compositions that represented milestones in her journey as a composer. On Wednesday night, she was rehearsing in the master bedroom when she heard a soft knock on the door. Try? Richard opened the door a crack, remaining in the doorway. Sounds good, he said. The compliment so unexpected that Elisa nearly missed a chord. Thanks. Is that new? The one you were playing just now? Leap of Faith? Yeah. I wrote it the night before I went to Nashville. Richard nodded thoughtfully. It has good energy, different from your other compositions. The fact that he had noticed differences between her songs surprised Elisa. It meant that on some level, he had actually been listening over the years, even when he seemed indifferent. Richard, about tomorrow. I can't yet, Elisa. His face softened slightly. But I've been thinking, maybe we can find an arrangement that works for both of us, without either of us having to completely give up what they want. A small bud of hope grew in Elisa's chest. It's all I've ever wanted. Let's take it one step at a time, okay? Talk to me when you get back from Nashville on Sunday. We can talk, for real, this time. It was not a reconciliation, but it was an opening, a crack in the wall that had risen between them. On Thursday afternoon, Elisa drove to Nashville with her guitar and a small suitcase, her heart light for the first time in weeks. Janie was waiting for her at the hotel, buzzing with excitement. Together, they spent the afternoon preparing for the show, with Janie insisting that Elisa needed a proper artist look. Forget the sober suits and office ensembles, Janie declares, rummaging through the hotel closet where Elisa has hung the few clothes she's brought. Tonight is about presenting yourself to the world as who you really are. After an impromptu shopping trip, Elisa glanced at herself in the mirror in the tiny dressing room at the back of the Bluebird Cafe. The woman staring back at her looked both strange and familiar, her hair loose in natural waves instead of her usual controlled bun, a simple yet elegant dress in a deep shade of blue, which made her eyes look more intense. low leather boots that Janie insisted were perfect for a country folk songwriter. "Wow," Marcus commented when he saw her. "You look different," Elisa suggested. "Authentic," he corrected with a smile. "Ready to shine." The Bluebird Cafe was smaller than Elisa had imagined, but every inch was brimming with history. On the walls were photos of artists who had graced that same tiny stage. Garth Brooks, Taylor Swift, Faith Hill, people who had turned dreams into reality. The audience was a diverse mix. Tourists, local music lovers, a few faces that Marcus identified as industry people, producers, agents, other musicians. And then, as Elisa peeked through the curtain 5 minutes before going on stage, she saw a face that made her heart stop. Richard, sitting discreetly in the background, next to a column, almost hidden, but undoubtedly there. Janie moved closer to her, following her gaze. "I invited him," she confessed in a whisper. "I wasn't sure he'd come. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you would be too nervous. More than you already are." Before Elisa could fully process the implications, the evening's host was on the small stage introducing her to the audience. A new voice from Memphis, Tennessee, making her Bluebird debut tonight. Please give a warm welcome, Elisa Mason. His legs felt like jelly as he walked to the central stool, guitar in hand. A soft light illuminated the space around him, creating a small circle of calm amidst the anxiety. "Good evening," she said into the microphone, her voice surprisingly steady. "I'm Elisa Mason, and these are my stories." Her eyes briefly met Richard's at the back of the room, and then she began to play. The first notes of "Cages We Build" filled the space, followed by her voice, soft at first, then growing in confidence as the song's story unfolded. A story about liberation, about breaking self-imposed patterns, about courage. The audience was absolutely silent, absorbing every word, every note. When the song ended, there was a moment of reverent silence before the applause began. Elisa felt something breaking inside her, not painfully, but liberatingly, like ice melting after a long winter. "This next song," she said into the microphone, "I wrote one night when I realized I was afraid to try, but I was even more afraid of never knowing what could have been." Her fingers found the chords of Leap of Faith, and she allowed herself to be completely vulnerable, her voice revealing every emotion, every insecurity, every hope she had held back for so long. As she sang, her eyes occasionally met Richard's. He didn't smile, didn't react visibly, but he didn't look away either. He was really listening, perhaps for the first time. The next 3 songs passed in a blur of pure emotion and connection with the audience. When Elisa played the last chord of her set, the feeling of accomplishment was so intense it almost made her dizzy. The applause was warm, enthusiastic. People who had never seen her before were on their feet, cheering her on. Marcus, on the side of the stage, had a smile that threatened to split his face in half. Janie was visibly crying. And Richard had disappeared from his place. Elisa's heart sank momentarily, until as she stepped off the stage, she saw him waiting near the performer's exit, holding a simple bouquet of lilies, his favorite flowers. "You came," she said as she approached him, still dazed from the adrenaline of the performance. "I couldn't miss it." He held out the flowers. "You looked amazing up there." "Really?" She couldn't hide the vulnerability in her question. "Yes." His eyes met hers, without reservation. "You were right, Elisa. I was wrong. You have something special, something people need to hear." The words she had waited so many years for finally came, and Elisa didn't know how to react. Part of her wanted to throw herself into his arms in gratitude. Another, more cautious part reminded her that one compliment couldn't erase years of diminishment. "Thank you for saying that," she finally replied. "It means a lot to me." Richard stepped forward hesitantly. "That song, Leap of Faith, it was about us, wasn't it?" "It was about me," Elisa corrected softly. "About who I am, who I want to be. But yes, our relationship is part of that story." He nodded slowly, absorbing her words. "We need to talk when you get back to Memphis. Really talk. With cards on the table." "Yes, we do." She hesitated, then added, "Are you staying for the rest of the weekend?" Richard shook his head. "I have an important meeting tomorrow morning. I just came to see you today." The 4-hour trip there and another 4 hours back just to watch a 30-minute show. The gesture said more than any words could. "Drive carefully," Elisa said, holding the lilies to her chest. Always. As Richard turned to leave, Elisa called his name. He stopped, looking back. "Thank you," she said simply, "for coming, for listening." A small smile appeared on his face. "Thank you for not giving up, on yourself or on us." After he leaves, Janie approaches, looking curiously over her shoulder at the door where Richard had left. "So, we're talking." Elisa smiled slightly, breathing in the scent of the lilies. "It's a start." Later that night, as the adrenaline finally began to wear off, Elisa sat on her hotel bed processing the day's events. The show had been an unquestionable success. Marcus had already received messages from other places interested in booking her. The record company was even more excited about the project. And Richard had taken the first step toward reconciliation. Not a complete surrender, but an acknowledgement that perhaps there was room for both of their worlds to coexist. She picked up her guitar, strumming softly, letting the melody flow naturally. A new song was beginning to take shape, not about cages or leaps of faith, but about bridges, about finding ways to connect lives that seemed to be moving in opposite directions. Growth in different directions. She jotted the title at the top of a blank page in her songwriting notebook. The first few lines came easily. Roots intertwined beneath the ground, branches reaching different skies, yet the same sap nourishes our soul, growing different, but still whole. As the night wore on in Nashville, Elisa kept writing, transforming the experience of the past few weeks into something new, something hopeful, something true. The studio was buzzing with creative energy on Saturday morning. Session musicians tuned instruments, engineers adjusted levels, producers discussed arrangements. For Elisa, still processing the success of her Bluebird performance, the atmosphere was simultaneously intimidating and electrifying. "Ready to do some magic?" Marcus smiled, handing her a cup of coffee. "As prepared as I can be," Elisa replied, peering into the recording room through the glass window of the control booth. Her guitar was already positioned next to a vintage-looking microphone. "After last night, everyone is even more excited to work with you," Marcus commented. Carter from the label called 3 times this morning asking how things were going. The recording process was more intense than Elisa had imagined. Each song was dissected, reconstructed, layer by layer. Her voice, previously limited to the shower, the car, and rare performances, was now the main focus, analyzed and perfected with technical precision. More emotion in the chorus, the producer instructed during the 10th attempt at Cages We Build. "Remember what this song means. Let us feel the moment when the chains break." At 9 o'clock that night, exhausted but buzzing with accomplishment, Elisa listened to the playback of the 2 songs they had completed that day. Her voice, enveloped by the carefully constructed instrumental arrangements, sounded so different, bigger, richer, more confident. "That's how I've always heard myself in my head," she murmured to Janie, who had remained in the studio all day, offering moral support and the occasional thumbs up through the glass. "That's how the world will hear you now," Janie replied, squeezing his shoulder. On Sunday, they completed another track, leaving 2 for the following weekend. The studio team had developed a visible respect for Elisa's professionalism and talent, a newcomer who behaved like a veteran, absorbing techniques, adapting quickly, contributing valid ideas to the arrangements. "Are you sure you've never done this before?" the sound engineer joked during a pause. "Some people take years to feel this comfortable in the studio." As she drove back to Memphis on Sunday night, Elisa felt transformed, not just by external validation, although that was powerful, but by an internal sense of alignment. Finally, she was doing exactly what she was supposed to be doing, being exactly who she was supposed to be. The conversation with Richard lingered in her mind. What would he say? What would this new chapter between them be like if there was one? Anxiety mixed with hope as the lights of Memphis appeared on the horizon. When she arrived home, she found the living room bright and Richard waiting in the armchair, a book open on his lap. He looked up when she entered. "How was it?" he asked, closing the book. "Amazing. We completed 3 of the 5 tracks." He nodded, that same contemplative look he'd had when he'd seen her at the Bluebird. "You look different." "I feel different." Elisa set her suitcase down. "More complete, somehow." A silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. "You wanted to talk," Elisa finally said, sitting down on the couch. Richard took a deep breath as if gathering carefully organized thoughts. "I've done a lot of thinking these past few days. About us, about what happened, about where we go from here. And I've realized some things about myself that aren't easy to admit. He shifted in his chair, visibly uncomfortable with the vulnerability. For years, I convinced myself that I was protecting you, from disappointment, from failure. But the truth is, I was also protecting myself. Of what? Of losing you, of becoming irrelevant in your life. His eyes met hers. You were right that night when you said I was giving you an ultimatum. It was my fear talking. Fear that if you found success with your music, you wouldn't need me anymore. The raw honesty caught Elisa off guard. For years, she had seen Richard's opposition as control, as a lack of faith in her talent. She had never considered that it might come from a place of insecurity. Richard, it's not about whether I need you or not. It's about us both being able to be complete people, together or apart. I know that now. He nodded. Seeing you on that stage, it was like meeting a part of you that was always there, but that I never really allowed to emerge. And how did you feel about that? Proud, he admitted, the word coming out as if it had been wrenched from deep within his soul. And sad that I wasted so much time trying to prevent something so inevitable. Elisa felt tears forming. This was the conversation they had needed to have for years. So what do we do now? Honestly, I don't know. Richard stood, moving to sit next to her on the couch. But I know I don't want to lose you. And I know I don't want to be the person who gets in the way of your dreams. He took her hand, a gesture so familiar and yet so new in this changed context. I've been thinking, maybe I could take a few weeks off too. Join you in Nashville for the recordings. See this world that means so much to you. The offer was so unexpected that Elisa was momentarily speechless. Would you do that? If you let me into that part of your life? Yes. The silence that followed was different from the previous one. No longer tense but contemplative. The implications of this new arrangement, this potential reconciliation, were profound. We still have a lot to work out, Elisa finally said. It won't be easy to dismantle 12-year-old patterns. No, Richard agreed. But maybe it's time to create new standards. Together, they talked late into the night, more openly than they had in years. About fears, hopes, regrets. About how to rebuild a relationship on a new foundation, where they could both flourish individually while growing together. The following week, Elisa divided her time between Memphis and preparing for the next weekend in Nashville. Constant connections with Marcus, discussions about the new song he was composing, sending ideas for the EP cover. Richard surprisingly got involved too, not in a controlling way but with genuine interest. One night he found her working on a new song in the guest room, Growth in Different Directions. He read the title over his shoulder. Can I hear it? Elisa played the unfinished version, her voice soft in the stillness of the night. When she finished, Richard was silent, deep in thought. It's about us, isn't it? He asked, repeating the same question he'd asked about Leap of Faith, but with a completely different tone. Yes, Elisa admitted. About finding ways to stay connected even when our lives take different directions. It's beautiful, he said simply. It should be included on the EP. Do you think so? The idea hadn't occurred to Elisa. The EP was already planned with 5 specific tracks. Absolutely. This is the message you should share with the world. On Thursday, Richard surprised Elisa with news. He had secured 2 weeks of vacation. He would leave with her for Nashville the next morning. Are you sure about this? Elisa asked, still adjusting to the idea of Richard willingly entering her musical world. I've never been more certain, he replied, and there was a determination in his eyes that she rarely saw directed at anything other than his own professional goals. The drive to Nashville on Friday had a completely different atmosphere than the previous one. Richard drove, occasionally watching Elisa as she reviewed sheet music, made notes, sang snatches of melodies. I have a confession to make, he said when they were halfway there. I've been doing a lot of research on Blue Ridge Records this week. They seem to be really reputable in the independent scene. Carter Blackwell has an impressive track record of developing new artists. Elisa turned to him, surprised. Did you do research on the record label? Of course, if I'm going to support you on this, I need to understand the terrain. A wry smile appeared on his face. You know how I am. I like to be informed. When they arrived at the studio, Marcus was waiting outside. His expression upon seeing Richard was one of initial shock, followed by polite caution. Richard Mason. Richard held out his hand. Husband of your new star. Marcus Reeves, he replied, shaking the offered hand. "I've heard a lot about you." "I bet." Richard laughed, surprisingly at ease. "Not all good, I imagine. I'm here to change that impression." Inside the studio, Richard stood quietly in the back of the control room, watching with fascination as Elisa's raw compositions were transformed into polished productions. Occasionally, he would ask the engineers technical questions, which they responded with growing respect for his genuine interest. On Saturday night, after a productive day completing the fourth track, Carter Blackwell showed up at the studio. Tall, with gray hair and an air of experience that only decades in the music industry could bestow, he greeted Elisa warmly before being introduced to Richard. "So you're the famous husband," Carter commented, assessing Richard with shrewd eyes. "Famous is an exaggeration," Richard replied with a polite smile. "I disagree. Growth in different directions is already circulating around our team. A powerful ballad about transformation and commitment. A must-have for the EP, in my opinion." Richard looked surprised. "Have you heard? Marcus sent over the preliminary demo yesterday. It's exactly the kind of authentic music we're looking for. It speaks to universal experiences in a deeply personal way." The look Richard gave Elisa was filled with an emotion she couldn't quite name: pride.